Long, long ago, in the highlands of Mbale, there lived a young woman named Zulaika, daughter of Chief Wamuyu, a ruler both feared and admired. Zulaika's beauty was said to rival the moonlight on Lake Nalubale, but her heart was guarded like a lioness protecting her cubs. Suitors came from far kingdoms with camels, cattle, gold, and rare gemstones, but none returned with her hand. Her father had sworn she would marry only the man who proved his worth, not with wealth, but with fate. And so he devised a custom unlike any other, a trial called the Path of Shadows. 3 trials, each cloaked in mystery, pain, and risk. Many tried, all failed. Some returned with broken spirits, others never returned at all. Among the villagers was a young man named Baraka. He was the son of a weaver and had no royal blood, no cattle of his own, and no title to his name. But his eyes held a quiet fire, and his heart, foolish or brave, beat only for one person, Zulaika. One market day, Baraka stood on a broken stone near the water well and called out loud, "I love Zulaika, daughter of Wamuyu. I will face the path of shadows to win her hand." Even some of the elders shook their heads, amused and offended at once. One shouted, "Stay in your place, thread boy." But Chief Wamuyu said nothing. Then he spoke calmly. "If you wish to try, commoner, then try. Let the trials be your answer." The first trial was called the Forest of Echoes. It lay beyond the river Nyota, in a part of the land where even birds feared to fly. The suitor had to enter at dawn and return by dusk with a branch of the whispering tree, a strange tree said to grow only at the very heart of the forest. When Baraka entered, he tied a cloth around his ears to block the voices. The forest was cursed. Anyone who entered heard the whispers of their ancestor, but also their own darkest thoughts. They told him his brother had betrayed him, also that his mother had lied about his birth, and that Zulaika would never love him. Baraka nearly turned back, but he remembered the words of his grandmother. "The voice that shakes you is not always true." He pressed forward, shaking and half-crazed, until he found the tree. Its branches shimmered like wet bone, and its roots bled sap like tears. He broke a single limb and ran. That night he returned just as the last light touched the hills, collapsing at the chief's feet, the branch in his hand. Baraka was the first in years to pass the first trial. The second trial was called the Well of Drowned Men. It was said to be bottomless, carved by gods in anger after a betrayal among men. The well sat deep in a crevice beyond the Devil's Tooth Ridge, surrounded by jagged rocks and the bones of those who had fallen. The rope Baraka chose had been woven by his own mother. She had tied 7 charms into it for protection. When Baraka stood at the well, some elders watched from a safe distance. As he lowered himself into the darkness, the light from above shrank to a pin. Inside the well he saw carvings, ancient, angry faces with mouths wide open in agony. At one point the rope jerked. Something below was pulling, but he did not panic. Then came the voices. "Turn back, Baraka. She will never love you. She waits only to watch you fail." But one voice, softer than the others, whispered, "Hold your breath." And just then black water surged up the walls like a living thing. Baraka held his breath, tightened his grip, and reached out blindly. His fingers touched something cold, a metal, a ring. He ascended in silence, soaked and pale but alive. He placed the ancient ring into the chief's hand. A murmur spread through the crowd. The third trial was called the Mirror of Bones. It was never spoken of in full, for even the elders who knew its history said it was cursed by something older than the gods. It was said to be kept in the Cave of Teeth, a labyrinth buried beneath the sacred hill of Kinyonga. Baraka prepared for 3 days. fasting and praying under the watch of the village seers. The night before his descent, Zulaika herself came to him, not with words of love, but a warning. My father made this final trial not to test you, but to break you. If you enter that cave, return only if you still know your own name. And so, on the morning of the trial, with the sun hidden behind a heavy mist, Baraka walked into the cave of teeth. He carried no weapon, only a torch, and the resolve of a man with nothing left to fear. The entrance closed behind him, swallowed by stone and silence. Inside, the walls pulsed like veins. The deeper he went, the colder the air grew. Bones crunched underfoot. When he found the chamber, the mirror of bones stood on a pedestal of ribs, surrounded by skulls with mouths stretched wide in silent screams. Baraka stepped forward and the torch flickered wildly. Then the mirror stirred, his reflection twisted. What emerged from the surface was not a man. It had his face, but no soul. Its skin was cracked like burnt earth. Its eyes were hollow. Its mouth opened in a grin that held no joy, only hunger. Baraka stepped back. The creature lunged and the torch went out. There was no light, only the sounds of breath, of footsteps circling, of two hearts beating in time. He struck with fire, flint sparked in the darkness, and the torch relit, catching the monster's face. The creature whispered things only Baraka had ever thought. It mocked his poverty, it snarled his worst fears. But Baraka did not break, and then he attacked, with the scream of everything he had endured. He struck again, and again, until the creature crumbled into ash and teeth. When Baraka stepped out of the cave, his face was pale, but his eyes clearer than ever. He still knew his name. Dust covered his tunic, his hands were bruised, and his torch burned low, but he walked upright, his steps steady. The sun, long hidden behind mist and doubt, broke through the clouds and spilled golden light across the hill of Kinyonga. The crowd, who had gathered in half hope, half fear, fell silent. At the front stood Chief Wamuyu, his robes dark as charcoal and trimmed in lion's mane. For a long moment the chief did not speak. His sharp eyes studied Baraka, not as a ruler weighs a subject, but as a father studies a man. Then slowly Chief Wamuyu walked toward him. No guards followed, no drum sounded. Only the hush of wind and the beating of hearts. He stood before Baraka. The village held its breath. Chief Wamuyu raised his hand and struck Baraka, not harshly but with a firm clap on the shoulder, the kind given to warriors returning from war. Then with a voice that carried over the hills and into the marrow of every listening soul, the chief declared, "This man has walked the path of shadows. He has returned with his name intact. He has broken the fear of forests, survived the drowning well, and defeated the demon that lives in the bones of men. There is no nobler blood than the courage in his veins." The crowd gasped. Then Chief Wamuyu did something no one had seen in all his years of rule. He embraced Baraka, a deep, proud, fatherly embrace. From the side of the crowd, Zulaika stepped forward. Her beauty was no longer just that of a chief's daughter, but of a woman who had watched love tested in fire and emerge unbroken. Her eyes glistened. She moved without hesitation and stood before Baraka, searching his face for doubt. But she found only strength, humility, and an endless tenderness. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and said with quiet certainty, "I accept you, Baraka, not because you won, but because you saw me even when the world said you should not, and you did not flinch." In the days that followed, the hills of Mbale became a living celebration. Drums shook the ground from dusk to dawn. Elders dusted off forgotten songs. Hunters brought antelope and wild goat for the feast. Potters shaped clay vessels with symbols of strength and union. The cursed river long feared, shimmered under moonlight as if washed clean by the courage that had risen in one of their own. Even the birds seemed to sing longer, and the stars, yes, the stars, stayed longer than usual in the night sky, as though they too wished to see what love forged in fire looked like. Zulaika wore a gown dyed in deep forest green and royal amber, threaded with beads carved from the sacred fig tree. Baraka's robe was woven by his mother but stitched by the village women themselves, a blend of humble fabric and proud hands. Around his waist was tied a red sash, the color of blood earned, not born. On the wedding day, Chief Wamuyu danced, not like a chief but like a father who had nearly lost something precious and found it again. His steps were heavy, filled with power, and when he stomped the earth, the young men shouted in rhythm. Chiefs from distant villages arrived bearing gifts, ivory, kola nuts, hand-carved drums. Even the moon rose early as if it could not wait. Zulaika and Baraka were married under the sacred baobab, where the wind carried their vows across the valley and back. They jumped the broom of unity. They shared palm wine from the same gourd. And when they knelt before the elders, a rain gently began to fall, not in sorrow but in blessing. And so, a commoner became legend. And love, once mocked, danced across the hills like thunder with bare feet. The drums had barely faded from the hills when another storm began to brew, one not of joy, but of treachery. Days after Baraka and Zulaika were joined in sacred union while the village still feasted and sang, a shadow returned to Mbale in the form of a forgotten face. Rugawa, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a twisted grin and eyes like coals soaked in oil. Years ago, he had been the only man to survive the second trial, the Well of Drowned Men, but he had fled before facing the third. Cowards do not die, they say. They wait in the dark and scheme. No one expected Rugawa's return, and no one expected what he brought with him. One market morning, with the sun climbing lazily through a haze of wood smoke and morning dew, a loud clamor echoed through the square. Villagers gathered, eyes wide with disbelief. Rugawa stood at the center of the square, holding high the staff of honor, the sacred symbol of Chief Wamuyu's authority. The staff was carved from the ancestral tree of Mbale and inlaid with stones only found in the river Nyota's deepest bend. It was never to leave the hands of the chief except upon his death. Now it gleamed in the hands of a thief. "I stole it," Rugawa declared boldly, his voice a thunder of insolence. "I, Rugawa, the man who faced the well and returned stronger. The man whose courage was ignored while a threadmaker rose to glory." Gasps spread like wildfire. The guards reached for their spears, but Chief Wamuyu raised a hand, his face carved with fury and shame. Rugawa sneered, "Strike me down and the staff burns. Try to take it by force and I vanish again into the hills." The chief's silence spoke volumes. Without the staff, his title was hanging by a thread. The symbol of his authority, his father's honor, was now hostage. Then Rugawa turned to Baraka, who stood with Zulaika just beyond the crowd. "You," he spat, "you are no champion, just a lucky peasant with a clean face. Fight me. Let the gods choose. If I win, Zulaika becomes mine, and the staff remains mine by right. If I lose, I return it, and I leave." Chief Wamuyu's jaw tightened. He looked between the two men, trapped between law and chaos. Rugawa had left him no honorable way out. "I cannot forbid this," he said bitterly. "If I do, my people will see weakness. I will not be called a chief without courage." Baraka stepped forward, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "Then I will fight." Zulaika clutched his arm, whispering, "You've already given more than any man. You don't need to prove anything." Baraka looked at her with a soft smile. "I'm not proving it, my love. I'm protecting it." A circle was cleared in the great courtyard. Drums began again, Not the drums of celebration, but the slow, grim rhythm of judgment. The villagers surrounded the combat ring, faces drawn tight with anxiety. Rugawa entered shirtless, his body scarred from battles in forgotten places. He carried twin blades curved like fangs. Baraka came barehanded. He carried no weapon, only resolve. The fight was brutal. Rugawa struck first, slashing at Baraka's ribs. Blood flowed early, but Baraka ducked low, twisting beneath the blades, landing a crushing elbow to Rugawa's side. They clashed like wild beasts, grappling, throwing, striking. The crowd roared with every blow. Dust turned to mist under sweat and blood. At one point, Rugawa landed a blow that cracked Baraka's lip and rattled his teeth. "You are nothing," he growled. "You were born in mud." Baraka, coughing, stood tall. But I rose. With a final burst of strength, Baraka feinted left, ducked under a blade, and slammed Rugawa to the ground. The wind rushed from Rugawa's lungs. Before he could rise, Baraka pinned him with a knee and drove his fist into Rugawa's jaw. Once, twice, until the would-be usurper's eyes rolled back. Silence fell. Then the chief's guards rushed in, shackled Rugawa, and held up the stolen staff of honor. The crowd erupted in cheers, tears, and chants of "Baraka! Baraka! Baraka!" Chief Wamuyu approached, his eyes moist with deep emotion. He took the staff in both hands, kissed it, and then turned to Baraka. "You have not only one love," he said, his voice echoing off the walls of Mbale. "You have preserved a people's pride, a chief's name, and the symbol of justice itself." From beneath his robes, Wamuyu drew a sacred bead, deep red and polished with oil and age. Only one man in each generation was ever given the bead of flame, reserved for those whose courage lit the path for others. He slid it around Baraka's neck and declared, "From this day forth, you are no longer Baraka the commoner. You are Baraka the flame-bearer, protector of Mbale, son of the mountain." The villagers dropped to one knee in unison. Zulaika stood beside him, her eyes full of quiet pride. Baraka was no longer the threadmaker's son. He was the fire in their bones, the shield of their home. In the moons that followed, Baraka and Zulaika lived in the richest and most protected part of the land. In a home built with cedar and stone at the foot of the sacred hill. Hunters watched his gates. Children sang his name. Elders sought his counsel. And whenever the wind passed through Mbale, it carried not the sound of gossip or doubt, but the legend of the man who rose from dust, loved fiercely, and burned like a flame the world could not extinguish. And so the story ends, not in silence, but in triumph.